The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode 112.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the original series episode called Dagger of the Mind. Joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
Howdy, Dom. Coming from my new house in scenic Fort Shaw, Montana.
Nice, Fort Shaw. That's on the Wyoming side of the state, right?
Oh, no, it's right in the middle. It's actually closer to Idaho than Wyoming.
Oh, right. Because is Wyoming to your east?
South.
Oh, okay.
Dom obviously doesn't
hang my head in shame.
Western geography.
It's all that flyover country. No. It's all those rectangular states. I have trouble keeping them straight. I need to dig myself out of this hole quickly by switching to hello, Jimmy Akin. Welcome to the show again.
Hey, really, really great to be here on Secrets of Columbo.
That's right.
Really enjoyed watching the Columbo episode Dagger of the Mind. It was neat to see Columbo go over to England and do all these English things. And
was that an actual episode title?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's funny.
Columbo goes to England and they have lots of shots of famous British landmarks and stuff, which is their way of kind of doing a 1970s travelogue for people who wouldn't be able to afford to go to England.
Okay. Well, the title Dagger of the Mind is a Shakespeare reference.
It's also, yes, so it's English too. It's from MacBeth, where MacBeth is on his way to commit a murder, and he hallucinates a dagger in front of him, guiding him down the hallway to commit the murder. And he's wondering, is it a real dagger or just a dagger of the mind?
Yes. Is this a dagger which I see before me? It's a famous line, actually, which people should know, or if taken high school English. So, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain, which, given that it's summer while we're recording this, and I was out in the heat, I can understand maybe hallucinating a dagger before me. But they never actually used the phrase in the episode where we're to kind of get the idea from this. So just to kind of set the stage, what are we talking about? So Dagger of the Mind is a first season episode. It was the 9th episode aired, although we should remind people that the order of the original series first season is sort of open to interpretation, what's the correct order to watch them in. But we're kind of going from the original production airing order.
It's really a mess because NBC just kind of said, let's throw this one here and throw that one there and throw another one over here, and
yeah. So if you're trying to follow along and you're like, what order are these guys going in? We're going off of the listing that's actually on the Memory Alpha wiki, the most popular Star Trek fan Wikipedia, wiki out there. So that's what we're going from. So anyway, this episode is the basic plot is on a routine visit to the Tantalus penal colony.
Dum.
There's a danger for Kirk and an Enterprise psychiatrist there.
Yeah, and Tantalus, just right off the bat, is such an ominous name,
isn't it?
It's because it's from Greek mythology. Tantalus was a mythological figure who, I believe, he was a son of Zeus. But he was condemned to Tartarus, which was the pit in Hades. So it's not just the land, not just Hades, not just the underworld. It's the pit.
It's the bad
in Hades, the really bad place. And he was condemned. This is where we get the word tantalize.
Yep.
He was condemned to be up to his neck in water with a tree branch with fruit hanging just above his head, But if he would strain upwards to eat the fruit, the branch would withdraw, so he couldn't eat the fruit. And if he bent down to drink the water level would recede, so he couldn't. So he was forever being tempted to eat and to drink, but could not for all eternity.
That just sounds horrific.
Well, it's meant to be.
Yes.
He's being punished.
So it's interesting that they've named this penal colony Tantalus, or maybe it's on a planet they call Tantalus.
Tantalus 5, yeah.
Yeah. So the episode was written by the screenwriter. His name was Shimon Winselberg. They use a pseudonym because they didn't let
Bar David.
Yeah, the obvious Jewish names were. It was that time. It was a time when we didn't do things like that. So,
like Bar David isn't obviously Jewish.
I know.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's very strange. But he apparently incorporated several references to Jewish parables into the script. But the reference I saw to that didn't say what they were.
Well, no, I only caught one.
Okay,
and it's not a parable; it's a historic account. I mean, to the extent that stuff in the Talmud is historical.
Right.
The legend goes, or the Talmudic account goes, that a Roman soldier came to Rabbi Shammai. There were two major rabbinical schools. There are these first-century rabbis known as Hillel and Shammai that became founders of these two schools of thought. And a Roman soldier comes to Shammai, who is the stricter of the two rabbis, and says, I'll convert to Judaism if you can explain the Talmud to me while standing on one foot, or if you can teach me the Talmud while standing on one foot. And Shammai's reaction is, oh, that's absurd, go away. And so he goes away. But then he goes to Rabbi Hillel, who is the more liberal, open-minded of the rabbis. And he makes him the same offer. He says, I'll convert to Judaism if you can explain the Talmud to me while I stand on one foot. And if you can explain the Torah to me, that's the first 5 books of the Bible. If you can explain the Torah to me while I stand on one foot. Well, there's a lot of laws. I mean, traditionally, there's 613 laws in the in the Torah. So how do you do that while a guy is standing on one foot? Well, the Roman soldier hops on one foot, and Hillel says, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. All the rest is commentary. Now go and learn.
Oh, interesting.
So this is very similar to Jesus's statement that, and Paul's statement that following the golden rule, what you want people to do to you, do unto others. That's the essence of the law and the prophets, and everything else is just an elaboration of that.
And so Dr. Adams is doing unto others what he wouldn't want done unto him in that sense.
I think he's violating the golden rule.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into this. We start with the transporter room on the Enterprise, and we have a close-up on a package being transported down. It says on the label, infrasensory drugs to be delivered to Dr. Tristan Adams. And I thought it was interesting. You could tell, in these modern, really cleaned-up versions of the video, that the doctor was pasted on. It was like a label that was pasted on over it. I really want to know what was under it, what they had originally there. Was it Mr.? Was it Professor? I don't know. But there were other packages as well being transported down. And for some reason, the transporter chief has forgotten that shields have to be lowered when transporting to or from a penal colony.
This is so painful from a writing perspective because they want to communicate to the audience that a prison planet has security procedures with a force field around it.
Yes.
You could do that in so many ways. You could have the transporter tech talking to the planet below saying, okay, we need you to lower a hole in your force field right now so we can beam this stuff down.
Yes.
That's all you need to do. Instead, the transporter guy is trying to transport the things down, and they're not going down. And so Kirk comes in and transporter shames him about, this is a prison planet, you idiot crewman. Go review the regulations. Well, and this is wrong on so many levels. Why didn't the force field show up on whatever preliminary scan must be done before every transport?
Right.
Why didn't we have radio contact with the prison planet before beaming down cargo? Are you in the habit of just beaming down cargo without notifying, even on non-prison planets, beaming down cargo without talking to people first about when and where it's coming?
Right.
Well, you had to have the scene where Kirk was being shown as the wise, knowledgeable, patient leader of the Enterprise, and this was a way to do it with these poor transporter techs who forgot their procedures.
It's a character moment that they're trying to put in there, but it's so awkwardly done that it makes Kirk look bad, a bad captain, if his crew is so poorly trained as they don't know what to do here. So anyway, they beam this stuff down, and then they beam up some research materials bound for the Central Bureau of Penology at Stockholm.
I like how it's in Stockholm.
Yes.
I don't like how there's a stowaway in the box that apparently was not picked up on scanners.
Right. Well, I was going to say research material. This is the biggest thumb drive ever. Like what? It's obviously, it's the 60s, so everything is assumed to be paper, but it's this huge man-sized box, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you got to remember when all their computer data logs are all on little cartridges,
Yes.
So I mean, you can kind of imagine for the time that would make sense, but
right. And Jimmy, I made a note. They ought to include in the penal colony security procedures scanning cargo for life signs. It's the equivalent of the prisoner hiding in the laundry truck as it drives out of the prison yard. That sort of silly thing. Yep. But anyway, he ends up disabling the transporter technician and escaping into the ship. So then the Enterprise leaves orbit, and Kirk and McCoy are on the bridge discussing this, Dr. Tristan Adams, and how his theories have changed penal colonies to make them more like resorts and spas in the enlightened future.
Yet now that's kind of interesting because it plays into what was going on in the 60s, where there was this huge focus on rehabilitation, and we're going to rehabilitate all these criminals, and it didn't exactly work out that well. But that was kind of in the air for the time, and so that's fine. I can accept that. But what I don't like is the fact that Dr. Adams, who we haven't met yet, is another galaxy-changing super genius who revolutionized his field.
Right.
Just like Roger Corby was in What Are Little Girls Made Of, and what Dr. Daystrom is going to be in The Ultimate Computer. And it's like we keep running into the galaxy-changing super geniuses who revolutionize their own field. This is so improbable. How about he's a smart guy who does penology?
Right. Well, and they revolutionize their field, but then they've gone wrong, and the Enterprise has to fix them, in some way. There was something I was going to say. Speaking of like the 60s and being, the time when we want to change, rehabilitate prisoners instead of just imprison them, we actually kind of ran into this in the other show that we do together, Secrets of Doctor Who, when we recently did the third Doctor story on the Mind of Evil, which took place in a prison where it was a machine that was changing people into sort of childlike, zombie-ish, peaceful people, which it was a very similar thing. So I thought that was very interesting. So they're contacted by the Tantalus colony and told that they've misplaced a violent inmate, and maybe he's on your ship right now. And that's where we cut to the prisoner exchanging clothes with the crewman, and the wild-eyed, sweating guy running about doesn't look at all suspicious to the people passing him in the corridors.
I do like how after they have this security alert to find the escaped guy, an armed guard comes onto the bridge.
Yes.
And McCoy and Kirk look at the guard and are kind of alarmed because, for a second, it's like, oh, security apparently sent this guy up without notifying them. But that makes sense. If you have a security procedure, you're in an alert situation, send an armed guard to the bridge, makes total sense.
That does.
So does lock the door to the bridge.
Exactly.
That will be a problem in a minute.
This was pre 9/11, so nobody thought to lock the door to the bridge, and he's going to just waltz right in.
So, in fact, the inmate, the wild-eyed inmate, disables in the corridor a hapless security guard, takes his phaser. Man, they really got to retrain these red shirts. And on the bridge, Spock pontificates to McCoy about how humans have glorified organized violence for 40 centuries, but imprisons those who employ it, while Vulcans disposed of emotions, so there's no more motive for violence among them. And I'm like, oh, really? I have a whole bunch of Star Trek episodes that say otherwise, like, I don't know, Amok Time, for instance.
Well, none of those have been written yet, so.
Yes, yeah. It was amusing having Spock being so superior there. So this guy, his name is Van Gelder. He arrives. You got to watch out for those Dutchmen. He arrives on the bridge and disables this security guard.
Yeah, they might burn down your Reichstag or something.
Exactly. He disables the security guard who's guarding the door to the bridge with his back to it by tapping him on the neck, as we do in Star Trek original series. Demands to see the captain, and when he tries to ask for asylum, he starts convulsing for some reason. And he claims to be not an inmate of the prison, but the director of Tantalus Colony and the assistant to Dr. Adams, and claims his memory was erased. And this is when Spock manages to get the drop on him and does the Vulcan neck pinch and knocks him out. On the bridge, Spock confirms that Van Gelder is a doctor and not an inmate.
Yeah. Oh, he says there's a full ID tape on him.
Yes.
So we've got tapes in the future on people. I like how at least on Babylon 5, Joe Straczynski realized we won't be using in the future whatever we're using now for memory, so he just made up data crystals.
Right, exactly. In fact, Star Trek uses them too, eventually, in the 90s. So Spock's on the bridge telling them this to McCoy and Kirk, who are in sickbay with Van Gelder. And then from Tantalus, Dr. Adams says that, yes, I'm so glad you found Dr. Van Gelder. He tried an experimental beam on himself. And McCoy says that doesn't ring true, but he can't say why. And Kirk dismisses McCoy, like, Adams' reputation is pristine. You shouldn't doubt him at all.
Yeah, so a couple of things here. One of them is just an acting thing that I like, although I think it was scripted, but I really like the performance of the actor who's playing Simon Van Gelder. He's clearly got this memory block where as he approaches certain topics, he starts to hesitate, and it's like he's in pain, and he has to really fight to get out the next piece of information. And as the information gets more sensitive, he's having more and more freezes like that, and is in more and more pain. And finally, when he gets to information that's just too sensitive, that he just breaks down. He cannot get it out. And he breaks down in this kind of anguished laughter. And because as a way of dealing with the pain. And that's psychologically plausible. Sometimes you're hurting so much, it's like it becomes this spasming laughter as a way to try to introduce some endorphins to take the edge off the pain. And so I liked that. I thought that was really cool. Also, I like Dr. Adams. We haven't met him physically at this point, but we're hearing him over the communicator. He's played by James Gregory.
Yes.
And I always get James Gregory confused with Jerry Hardin.
Yes.
They're similar. Jerry Hardin played Deep Throat on The X-Files. He also played Mark Twain on Next Gen and Dr. Neria on Voyager's Emanations that we recently did.
Mm-hmm.
But he's different than James Gregory. James Gregory played Inspector Luger on Barney Miller.
Yes,
if you
Frank
remember
Luger.
that.
Yeah.
And Dr. Adams comes across, so we know based on just the setup, he's going to be the big bad for this episode.
Right.
The question is, how do we go from alleged super genius who revolutionized his field and has a pristine reputation to he's the big bad? And we as an audience can feel that coming, and suspicions are going to grow about him. And the question is, how is he going to respond as to the growing suspicions? Will he do it well, or will he give himself away?
Right.
And he does it well.
Yeah.
He is really, I mean, Roger Corby had a few things where he would come back with reasonable responses, but Dr. Adams is like way better than that. He anticipates. He seems reasonable all the way through until quite late in the game when he suddenly flips and becomes evil. But all through this early part of the episode, he is Mr. Reasonable and cooperative, and he sounds sincere and caring. And as you say, Dom, he actually anticipates the questions that he's going to be asked. Like, one of the first things they do to see because Simon Van Gelder has asked for asylum. He does not want to go back down. And Spock is like, well, maybe you should ask if he wants him back, because that'll tell us if he is a threat. It'll at least add some evidence. If he doesn't even want him back, we can grant his asylum.
Right.
And so they ask him, about that, and over the horn, Dr. Adams is like, Captain, I wanted to ask about your patrol route, because if there are any other facilities that you think would be better for Simon Van Gelder that you're going to be passing close to, I want him to have the best of care.
Right. And of course, yeah.
McCoy pulls the rug out from under that privately to the captain, saying he knows there aren't any that are better. That was just a gambit.
Yes. And then he says, Kirk keeps putting him off, like, no, obviously there's nothing going on here. And so McCoy says, look, I'm gonna put you in a corner. I'm gonna put my doubts in my medical log, which by regulations requires you to answer in your log. So now you've got to deal with this.
You've got to investigate. Yeah.
And that sets up the episode. I do want to take a moment. You mentioned James Gregory as the guest star. This is a great guest cast. So James Gregory is awesome. And Thomas Morgan Woodward, he's credited as Morgan Woodward, but his full name is Thomas Morgan Woodward, plays Van Gelder. He shows up in the original series twice, first in this and then in the Omega Glory as Captain Tracy. Another great actor. He actually just passed away last year in February 2019 at 93. So, God rest his soul. But you may know him from the movie Cool Hand Luke, where he played Boss Godfrey. So that was one of his great. He was also in John Cassavetes' movie, 1976 movie, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, which is less well known, but a classic. But anyway, He's one of these guys who's worked in many different things over the years.
That's the amazing thing when you look at so many of the guest stars on Star Trek throughout the years. They're actors that show up time and time and time again. Like the greatest compliment you could give an actor, especially someone who does a lot of the second level casting, is they work. Meaning they're such good actors that maybe they're not the William Shatners or somebody like that, but they're constantly
they get a lot of
producing new content. So they're working.
That's right. It's like Doctor Who is in the UK. Everyone shows up eventually on Star Trek or in Doctor Who. So it's really awesome. So, so Kirk has this dilemma. Now he has to investigate the Tantalus penal colony. And Dr. Adams says, oh, yeah, sure, come on down. We'd love to have you come down. So Kirk is going to beam down to investigate along with someone from the medical staff who's got psychiatric and penology experience, who turns out to be this beautiful woman, of course, because it's Kirk. And it seems they have when he sees her in the transporter room, Kirk is a little thrown off.
He's really thrown.
Yes.
Something
having to do with the science lab Christmas party where something happened between him and this Dr. Helen Noel. Get it? Helen Noel from the Christmas party.
Oh yeah.
It's a little on the nose there.
And in thinking, now it's nice we have a reference to a Christmas party.
Yes.
But remember, this is the 1960s. This is Mad Men era in the real world. So what kind of office Christmas parties did they have? They weren't exactly wholesome all the time.
Right.
Well, we do find out later what happens. And it was very much a captain taking his prerogative. Might be.
Well,
not completely, but
yeah, there's sort of two. They sort of have it both ways, because this initial transporter room scene, Kirk is really uncomfortable.
Yeah,
if you knew nothing else, you would infer he went to bed with her,
right?
Yep,
and had a one night stand. But later on, when she gives her account of what happened, they danced and he talked about the stars, and that's it. And then she's going to suggest an alternative fantasy to him that didn't happen, where he swept her off her feet and took her back to his cabin.
Yes.
So they kind of, and we see that fantasy for reasons we'll talk about, but that's the fantasy. So they, on the one hand, we have Kirk dances with someone and talks about the stars, and then he's profoundly embarrassed by it later. That doesn't quite fit.
Well, it sounded like it wasn't just dancing, that they're kissing and possibly even making out. I mean, it was...
Well, sure,
my guess is that he probably drank too much, like you were inferred, Jimmy, like that there was that kind of Christmas party. He probably went a little on a bit and was in an embarrassingly profuse way, especially being her captain, which he probably is not supposed to fraternize with her, and that's probably what makes him uncomfortable. And I do like the fact that he under his breath vows revenge on McCoy if she's not the best possible person for the job.
I like how McCoy described her as one of our psychiatrists, and it's like, just how many psychiatrists do you need for 430 people?
Well, deep space, maybe. I don't think Troy was enough.
How many anomalies do they run into on a daily basis? I mean, that could really take a psychological toll.
Yes. Well, they do seem to have specials for every possible thing on board. Any script necessity. Anyway, they beam down to the surface and enter into this small building, which is apparently the entrance.
They enter into the lithium cracking station from Delta Vega, from where no man has gone before.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They've reused the matte painting. And it turns out to be a very high-speed elevator, which causes them to embrace and surprise, of course, for some reason. And then when they get to the bottom, Dr. Adams greets them and welcomes them. He says, "Welcome to Devil's Island," which is a reference to
a prison.
18th century or 19th century prison, French.
I think it operated for a while. I think it operated into the 1800s, so that would be maybe even later. That's where Papillon is set, right?
Yes, and it's infamous as being like the most horrific sort of prison you could imagine. He's saying this in ironically, but maybe not so ironically. But he's very welcoming. He's cordial. He's urbane. He's accommodating.
Lets Kirk keep his phaser.
Yep. He says, you military men, you feel more comfortable, holding on to those things, and it's very like he's putting him at ease. A woman arrives. She's a former inmate and therapist.
Admiral Cornwell walks into the
room. Yes. Well, this was the question. Her name is Lethe, which means forgetfulness. It's a reference to a Greek myth of
the river you drank from.
Yes, that makes you forget. What was the theory that the sort of off the wall theory that Cornwell is Lethe?
Yeah, so Lethe is a woman. She has a distinctive look.
Yes,
which is similar to Admiral Cornwell's look in
Star
Trek Discovery, which would have been about 10 years before this.
Yes,
and Lethe, it's not her real name. It means forgetfulness. She did some kind of crime, we don't know what, that landed her in Tantalus. And then she has been made a new person by the rehabilitation. Part of that is she doesn't even talk about what she did before, because that was another person. That person is gone. And she has this creepy zombie reprogrammed thing going on that she's working. And so then in the first season of Star Trek Discovery, we have all of a sudden, in an episode called Lethe, we have this Admiral Cornwell woman who's hooked up with this shady Captain
Lorca.
What's his name? Lorca.
Yeah.
And she's also a psychiatrist, which Lethe is a psychiatrist. She's now a therapist on Tantalus. And that is really weird, letting former inmates become therapist workers at your prison facility. Wow.
Yeah.
That's not going to ever go wrong. But there were so many similarities, including just physically how they looked, that a lot of people thought Admiral Cornwell is going to become Lethe. Yeah. She's going to commit some crime and be imprisoned and become this character. And I wish they'd done that. And I think that may have been their plan. In the second season, it ended up not being the case.
Right.
But I think in the first season, it may have been the plan to have Admiral Cornwell become Lethe.
Well, the only major difference feature-wise between the two of them was Lethe has black hair versus Cornwell has more brownish blonde hair.
Yeah. You can explain that. Yeah.
But they, part of their therapy, Dr. Adams explains, is they encourage people to forget their past crimes, which is a markedly different strategy than today, where you want to integrate an awareness of what you did and take responsibility for it, not just reprogram a person's personality so they don't even remember their crime.
Right. And Kirk finds it a little odd, but Dr. Helen says a shifting of memory patterns is basic to psychotherapy.
Oh, Dr. Helen is a foolish obstructionist who is entirely unsympathetic. I mean, originally it was Kirk who was playing the role of Dr. Adams is great, and McCoy was the skeptic.
Yes.
But now that Kirk's forced to investigate, he has to become the skeptic, which means we need a new foolish denier, and that role lands on Dr. Noel, who is just, Dr. Adams is great. Of course he's great. Blah, 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 blah. He's so great.
Well, but she does keep
every
getting shut
single
down,
turn.
though. She does keep getting shut down, though. She tries to explain, and either Kirk will jump over her or Dr.
Right.
Adams will jump over her. And
I kept wondering, whose side is she on? Like,
Yeah.
you were sent here to investigate as an impartial observer. You've already made your decision about what's going on based on Adams' reputation. But
Yeah, I mean, next thing you're going to fall in love with Dr. Adams and go off to SETI Alpha 5 with him.
There's a problem with the
wrong
personnel on the. Yeah. So on the tour, Kirk sees a room that Adams tries to walk past. Like, oh, don't pay attention. That's just storage. But Kirk wants to see it. So Adams says, oh, that's one of my experimental failures. And when Kirk insists, Dr. Helen tries to dissuade the captain. Captain, you're being so rude on insisting. Like, quiet. He's the captain. In fact, Adams sort of takes the captain's side. That's privilege of being captain. You get to decide these things. So he basically says that this is the device is a neural neutralizer, that it relaxes the patient's mind, but the effects are temporary, which is why it's a failure. And they keep using it, hoping it'll do some good in the more violent cases. And at the same time, we intercut with Van Gelder back on the ship, raving about the neural neutralizer and don't use it on me. And so we have this, contrast.
And he can't explain to Spock and McCoy, who were in sickbay, what a neural neutralizer is. So I have in my notes, I feel a mind meld coming on.
Right. The first one ever, in fact. But we'll get there. So Kirk asks the technician, the oddly blank-looking and lacking all affect technician, how it works. And Dr. Noel, again, assures Kirk that while she's not familiar with equipment, it is clearly no danger to anyone. Like, how can you say this? You have no idea what it is.
Well, she says it's based on similar technology that's used elsewhere, although she's not familiar with the specifics of this model.
Right. So,
but still, that's not enough of a basis to say no danger. Right.
And Kirk does finally get Adams to admit that this is the technology that injured Van Gelder. So he sort of had to draw it out of him. When they leave, this oddly unemotional and unblinking technician tells the guy in the chair that you will forget everything you've heard, or you will experience excruciating pain, as he turns up the beam. And I'm thinking, is this supposed to be like hypnosis or brainwashing, which was all the rage talked about then?
There is an interesting thing about hypnosis specifically. I mean, yes, this is brainwashing.
Yeah.
Which was a big deal. I mean, at the time, the CIA still had its MK-Ultra experiments going on to try to find an effective way to brainwash people, including using painful techniques.
Right.
We've talked about that some on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World with the episode on the death of CIA scientist Frank Olson.
Right.
And we'll be talking about it more when we talk about MK-Ultra. We also talked about it in hypnosis. There's a funny thing, though, about hypnosis in this. Now, I'm, as people will know, not a huge fan of hypnosis. I think it's a social role that people learn. It's not really what people claim it to be, which is this altered state of profoundly altered state of consciousness. But in the 60s, there was a concern about this. So when we get to the mind meld, let me tell you the hypnosis story.
Okay. I think I remember seeing something about that. But yeah, that'll be good. So Kirk communicates to Spock, who waits until Adams leaves the room to speak freely. Like, Kirk asks him something, and Spock just goes silent.
Yeah, this is, and then Adams takes the hint and leaves.
Yeah.
But this is great. I mean, communicators need a way to be taken off of speakerphone.
Maybe some way to send text on a screen that you type in.
Or a little thing you stick in your ear for privacy or something.
Which we know they have because Uhura has one. So anyway, Spock and McCoy are being very cautious while Dr. Helen is vehemently on Dr. Adams' side. So Kirk elects to stay overnight, like to do some more poking around.
And Van Gelder freaks out. He's like, no, don't let them stay.
Yeah. I mean, great acting here. He just is so over the top awesome. He throws himself into it. In fact, I think I read somewhere that the actor, like Morgan Woodward, actually had to take like 3 days off after filming this episode because it was so emotionally draining. So this is when Spock decides to mind meld, and this is the first. So it's his first mind meld with a human, he says, with Van Gelder, and it's the first mind meld in Star Trek, right?
Yes, yeah, this has never been done before. And to explain that, Spock says, because if this was well known, why didn't McCoy just say, hey, do a mind meld on him?
Right.
Well, Spock explains that this is a hidden personal thing to Vulcans. It's part of our private lives.
Right.
And that actually, now later mind melds become so common, people forget that.
Yes.
But this is like an intensely private thing you don't talk about with outsiders. And that actually fits with some stuff they do far down the line in Enterprise, where the mind meld is kind of a shameful thing that not everybody does.
Right.
And so this resonates with that as being, this personal secret thing you don't talk about. And so that actually fits very nicely with stuff down the line. But also because it's the first time this has ever happened, Spock is kind of explaining what's going to happen to McCoy and to Van Gelder. It's like, I'm going to touch him. And originally, apparently, he was supposed to touch him in the torso, but they just did the head, which makes more sense.
Yeah.
There's some risk here. I'm going to be changing pressures in your blood vessels and your nerves and things like that. So you could have a stroke or something is the implication. And he also makes a point of telling Dr. McCoy, this will only affect the person I touch. This is not hypnosis. And the reason they did all that and made that point so explicitly is because they didn't want to accidentally hypnotize people in the audience on television. So this will only affect the person I touch. This is not hypnosis. So they were big believers in hypnosis at this time and were actually scared that they might hypnotize someone in the audience.
Because you don't want people wandering out into the streets and on a Thursday night watching Star Trek on NBC. So we're going to have this mind meld kind of go back and forth a bit. But in the midst of this, as Spock is preparing, Kirk shows up at Dr. Helen's quarters. And she acts like he's coming for a date. She's like, "Oh, hi, Captain. It's after hours. We're gonna, continue where we left off at the Christmas party." But he's all business. Like, Kirk is on target here, and so she's still defending Adams, but Kirk has his doubts. And this is where I write in my notes, I do not like Dr. Helen.
Yeah,
and it's probably not the actress
her since the beginning.
Yeah, it's probably not the actress, but I just think the characters. Because for the necessity of, like you said, Jimmy, Kirk now has to switch from being pro Dr. Adams to skeptical. She needed to be the foil, so it just necessarily makes her. I don't know if you can if you could have done this better, but
yes, you could have. She could be. I mean, you could have a Mulder Scully thing.
Yes.
Where they're serving as foils to each other. At one moment, one of them is more favorable. At another moment, another is more favorable, and they work their way through the problem together. Instead, she is just one note. Ding, 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 ding. Everything she says is pro Dr. Van Gelder. She never has any doubts until suddenly he turns.
Right, Dr. Adams, yes.
Dr. Adams, yeah.
Well, speaking of Van Gelder, in his mind meld with Spock, we have he explains how the neural neutralizer works to erase memories and replace them with any thoughts that Dr. Adams chooses to place there, which sounds a lot like what people say hypnosis is.
And it's interesting. It's kind of emptiness-based brainwashing. It clears out everything in your mind so that you're lonely and receptive to any mental stimulation.
Right.
And that's how the brainwashing works.
So back on the surface, now that we've heard this, that Kirk doesn't know, Kirk says, "I'm going to put myself under the beam," which, as the audience, we're going, "Oh no, don't do that. You'll get hurt." But he's going to
remember what happened to Dr. Van Gelder.
Yes. He's like, "Well, we'll do it, very, very slow, very low level." And Dr. Helen's at the controls, and so for the first try, he doesn't even realize anything's happened. His face kind of goes a little slack in the midst of it, but he doesn't. He's like, "Start anytime you want. I just did it." So then the second time, he tells her to try a harmless suggestion. So she tells him he's hungry, and then as soon as it ends, like, whatever happens here, let's go find a kitchen after this because I'm starving, which is kind of funny. And then for the next try, he wants something unusual so that he knows that it's her suggestion and not him just being hungry. So she changes his memory of the Christmas party from him talking about the stars and carrying her off to his to a memory of him carrying her off to his cabin, for a fake one-night stand. And so her fake memory is about having Kirk being a cad on the make, basically.
And that's supposed to be the unusual thing that we both know didn't happen.
Right. Yes.
Except it's so in character for Kirk.
Exactly.
But this is like in the fantasy, this is the most womanizing Kirk ever.
Right.
He's got her to his quarters in the fantasy, and she's like, this would be easier if you told me you cared for me.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, what, do you want me to manufacture a lie that I care about you? And meaning I totally don't care about you?
Yeah.
Do you want me to wrap up this? He says, do you want me to wrap it up as a Christmas present for you? Because it's Christmas, get it? And it's like, ick, what the creepiest, womanizingest Kirk ever.
But this is her fantasy of him. That's what makes it even double creepy.
That's sort of ambiguous. I mean, her fantasy is just what she said to him, which is, you swept me off your feet and took me back to the quarters. What we're seeing here is what's in his head.
Yeah.
That he's manufactured based on her verbal instructions.
I kind of interpret it as we don't hear it, but she's continuing to tell him what happened.
It could be.
We're just not hearing
That's how
it.
I read it like Dom did, where it was, we're seeing what she's telling him.
Yeah. But maybe,
There are people who get a charge out of kind of transgressional sex of, it totally doesn't care about me, but we're going to do this.
Yeah. And I kind of got the sense that she was, I don't know, that she was wanting
kind
this
of domination fantasy.
Yeah, that she was, based on her other interactions with him, like being happy to see him when he came to her cabin, her quarters earlier in this evening. So I kind of got the sense of that. She would have welcomed advances from him. But anyway, Dr. Adams comes in and interrupts and takes over. And now we see him revealed in his full evilness. He turns up the beam and tells Kirk, "You're madly in love with Helen, and you're willing to sacrifice anything for her. You must have her, or the pain and longing will grow worse." And Kirk is fighting against the beam, like he's because Kirk is our hero, so he's stronger than anyone else with this. And so when Adams tries to cut him off from the Enterprise by giving up his communicator, Kirk fights back until he's incapacitated. So there's
and he has the same laughing, anguished breakdown that Van Gelder did earlier in the episode.
Right. And then we come back from commercial break, or that's probably where the commercial break was. I think I remember as a kid.
Yeah.
Because this episode made a big impression on me when I was a kid. It was really creepy.
Now I have a question at this point in my notes. Because what happens is, as Dr. Noel is testing this on Kirk and doing the Christmas party fantasy, Adams comes in with some assistants who just grab Dr. Noel.
Yes.
And cranks up the machine to 11 and does this, "You're madly in love," and suddenly she's gone.
Right.
To give this devastating blow to Kirk. And I'm like, what is the end game here?
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Why is Dr. Adams doing this? What does he expect to get out of it?
Well, he talks about having two of the great minds to be able to work on. Obviously, Dr. Van Gelder and Captain Kirk. So it's part of his experiments. It's not like there's an end game to control Kirk. I've got another great mind that I can experiment on.
If so, he's displaying a remarkable lack of foresight, because torturing a Starfleet captain is not gonna go well. I mean, the best thing he could do is give his dog and pony show to Kirk and Noel and say, "See, nothing to see here. Yeah, we had this failed experiment. Dr. Van Gelder hurt himself with it. It's really sad. We're keeping we're keeping it active for further experimentation at a very low level, and we're not going to repeat what happened with Dr. Van Gelder. Please put all that in your log. Take Dr. Van Gelder wherever you need. See you later."
Right.
That's the smart thing to do in this situation. How does torturing Kirk in this way, and they're planning on torturing Dr. Noel too, how is that going to get him what he wants, which is to be left alone by Starfleet?
Well,
or just wipe the memory. Right.
Yeah. The only things I can think of is what his plan is to break down both Kirk and Dr. Noel and implant post-hypnotic suggestions in them to where they can't talk about this and can't remember it and think about it.
Right.
But that plan is not going to go well because look at what happened with Simon Van Gelder. He was a stuttering, shambling, twitching, wreck after what happened to him.
The only thing I almost think you're thinking a little too deep. This is the stereotypical scientist who's so wrapped up in his studies, his research that nothing matters, which we've seen how many times in both Doctor Who and Star Trek? Just that scientist. I don't care that the planet is blowing up. I must have my research. That kind of scientist.
Although Dr. Corby, at least in What Are Little Girls Made Of, at least he had a plan. Like he was going to replace Kirk, and that replacement Kirk was going to take him and his stuff to another place where they could continue their work. Yeah, Adams doesn't even have that much, but it is a problem. It is a problem. So Kirk wakes up with Dr. Noel ministering to him in the quarters, and he starts telling her he loves her, but then he starts to remember what happened. And then there's this funny moment where he sees this unusually large air duct in the wall, and starts to kind of stalk toward it, and she thinks he's stalking toward her. It's just a kind of a comedic moment where she misunderstands his intent.
I didn't take it as comedic. I thought she was genuinely afraid that he's about to assault her.
Well, I mean, from the audience viewpoint, like we know that he's going for the air duct behind her, and she's misinterpreting.
Well, there's tension though, because you can see it on her face where she's looking at him, like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And then as his expression turns towards the vent, she kind of looks and goes, "Oh."
Right. So this unusually large air duct they have in the colony, in a penal colony. Why would you have such large? Never mind. So he sends her into the air duct to find a power system to short circuit.
Sci-fi cliche into the duct world.
Yes, that's right. So he wants to short circuit the shield.
And to ratchet up the drama, he asked her, "Do you have any experience reprogramming hyperpower relays?" And she's like, "Nope." Well, you could kind of die. Anything's better than being subjected to Dr. Adams's ray.
Yeah, yes. You touch the wrong thing and you're dead. Okay. Meanwhile, Kirk is taken off for another treatment, and the bumbling guards don't notice that Dr. Helen isn't there anymore.
But Lethe does.
Oh, does she? That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
She comes in and reports. While Kirk is under the ray, Lethe comes in and says Dr. Noel is gone, and Adam starts pressuring Kirk to reveal what he knows, but he doesn't rat her out.
Yes, instead he yells, "There are 4 lights!" Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's another one. So Helen finds an apparently ancient power substation.
And it's so amazing that you have all of these ducts running through this prison facility that are easily accessible, and none of the other prisoners have ever crawled through them to turn off the force field. Really?
Yeah, she does avoid some guards that they're searching for her, and she turns off the power, which turns off the beam that's blasting Kirk, which lets Kirk escape by karate chopping Dr. Adams and his assistant. But the guard comes back and fights with Dr. Noel, and he disables her, turns the power back on, but when he turns to grab her, she kicks him into the high voltage and makes him barbecued red shirt, basically.
Yeah, electrocutes him to death. Meanwhile, up on the ship, Spock has been trying to break through the force field, and it hasn't been working. But now that she's got the power off, he can beam down, and he does so alone for
without
reasons, but says, "Send a security team after me." Dude, you should have had one waiting there on the transporter pad as you're trying to break through their force field.
Exactly.
But also, because Kirk has escaped, the guards who were with Adams chase after him, and Adams is left alone, unconscious, on the floor of the room with the ray.
Right, and that's significant because Spock beamed down to the location of where the power was interrupted. So he goes to where Dr. Helen is, and she's already
back
gone.
In the ducts.
Yes, she's already back in the ducts. So he shuts down, disables the force field controls, and then turns the main power back on. But because Adams is on the floor in the treatment room under the beam, when it comes back on, unattended at full power, he's stuck under it, being beamed out of his mind.
Relentlessly with no input. That's the key thing. He's being brain wiped with no new input.
Right.
So he's experiencing the extreme content deprivation. It's like when your Wi-Fi fails in a blackout.
That's right. My phone. Where's my Facebook? So Kirk, still under the influence of the programming, is back in the quarters, thinking he's in love with Helen. So when she comes back to the room, he starts kissing her, and then Spock comes in and shakes his head.
She protests this isn't right.
Yes.
Because even though she wants Kirk, she doesn't want him because he's been programmed.
Right? Yes.
And so she protests it isn't right, and Spock comes in and has this confused, bemused expression.
Yes.
And we get the clarinet of humor in the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Bump, bump, bump. But reminded of Adams, Kirk runs out of the room and goes back to the treatment room where McCoy is there. And we have the famous line, "He's dead, Captain." He doesn't say he's dead, Jim, but he does say he's dead, Captain. And Kirk notes that Adams' mind was emptied without even a tormentor for company, which is an interesting concept. So back on the ship, Van Gelder sends them a message from the colony that the neural neutralizer has been destroyed. He's apparently back in charge and himself again. McCoy muses that it's hard to believe a man could die of loneliness, but Kirk says, not when you sat in that room, that you could die of loneliness. So he's remembering what he's experienced. And that's where we end things. I do want to make a note that Dr. Helen was originally going to be Janice Rand, accompanying the captain, but they wanted to avoid her having become involved with Kirk again, especially in these somewhat involuntary way. And there's a note online which says that Grace Lee Whitney, who played Janice Rand, was having personal issues on set with some of the way they were portraying her character, which I think has to do with the Enemy Within episode, where we have implications of forcible action against a woman by a man in that, and that she has since said she had trouble with. So having this happen again would probably have been too much for her. So that was So that's why it's Dr. Helen.
Which actually makes more sense.
Yeah, to have instead of a yeoman, have a actual psychiatrist or an expert in these things. Yes. We were going to come back and talk about why we thought they call this Tantalus, why the colony is called Tantalus.
Oh, sure.
So
what do you think?
I guess my thought was the idea of this, that the way the mind wipe was going on was almost kind of this torture, like the torture of the trying to eat the fruit or drink the water, because it was almost a mirror image Pavlov's dog, instead of the bell signifying food, signifying a treat. Instead, it was the pain signifying something that was bad to avoid. That's
negative reinforcement.
Negative reinforcement. So I think that was kind of part of it. I mean, just kind of my thoughts, anyways. I don't know about you, Jimmy.
What do you think?
I think they just knew Tantalus was a scary sounding name from Greek mythology that sounded kind of ominous, and so that's why they did it. I don't think at least I can't see any clear through line to why they would use that name given the content of the episode. Just like I also don't see any clear through line to why they would call this Dagger of the Mind, because nobody's committing a murder in this and debating about, is this a real dagger or not? I mean, we do have a little bit of, is this real or is this just fantasy? And I'm not going to sing Bohemian Rhapsody.
Easy come, easy go. Yeah.
But yeah, with the Kirk Christmas party fantasy, Mama, I killed a man. But there's just a little, there's not enough there. I think it's just, we want a famous, classy Shakespearean sounding title that has something to do with the mind for all the people who care to read TV Guide and want to know what the episode is called.
There are a number of Shakespearean references in episode titles in original series. We got Conscience of the King coming up, which is very much a Shakespeare episode, by the way. That's much clearer why.
And that one actually has more to, has more to do with the actual content of the play that's from, which is Hamlet in that case.
Yes, exactly. Which is a really great episode. But that's coming up.
Father, did you have any added notes?
Only thing I have to say is I think both Starfleet and penal colony security personnel need to be taught on how to do an effective security sweep. When somebody's just hiding around a corner twice and they can't find them.
Yes, that is true.
I had a couple extra notes. One of them is I find the security system they have for Tantalus 5 interesting. it makes sense to me you put up a force field because you don't want prisoners beaming off the planet. It also makes sense to me that you have a security screen that blocks communications, because initially Kirk, when he's in Dr. Adams' office, he flips open his communicator and Dr. Adams is like, I don't think you're going to be able to get through. I got to turn off this thing. And that makes sense, too, because you also don't want prisoners having unauthorized communications with people above the planet on the outside, because they could be laying escape plans or smuggling stuff or issuing secret criminal orders in and out of the prison. So it makes sense to me that you'd have a force field and a communications blackout screen. But then later on, they ignore this, because when Kirk is in the chamber of horrors, he flips open his communicator, and that's like treated as a threat by Dr. Adams. So why, if you've got your security communications blackout screen up, do you care if he's got his communicator there?
Right.
The thing I can kind of headcanon that, saying, well, what actually happened the first time he tried to use it is it wasn't yet on the system. It wasn't yet an authorized device. But he then authorized it, and so later Kirk could be in communication with the Enterprise at will. And that makes sense, like if you're in a prison and you had a similar blackout thing, but you bring in an official, you could authorize his device so he can have communication when he needs to.
That's true.
The other thing was in the scene where we get our first mind meld, Spock doesn't use the my mind to your mind language. That hasn't been created yet. But not only is Van Gelder's acting really good in this, but so is Leonard Nimoy's. Leonard Nimoy gets to show real emotion in the mind meld. There's this kind of poetic, it doesn't really make linear sense, but there's this kind of poetic series of words that Van Gelder is saying. It's like life, death, loneliness. And after each one, Leonard Nimoy is like, yes. So it's like life, yes. Death, yes. Loneliness, yes. And it's really fascinating to watch Leonard Nimoy emote that much in the Spock role. He's clearly into this, the emotional impact of this sequence of thoughts he's getting.
Yeah, that was very good. Leonard Nimoy getting to show his range there. Good, awesome. We'll wrap things up there. That was a great episode. So let's take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek, including Jack B., David H., Mark, Barb G., and David F. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of Dagger of the Mind's Eye? You can let us know by commenting.
Dagger of the Mind.
Dagger of the Mind.
The Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Yes, which is the Star Trek novel that is no...
Star Wars.
Oh, my gosh. I'm just going to move on. You can give us feedback on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Or send an email to trek@sqpn.com. Get me out of here, Scotty, before I say something else. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing, wait for it, Star Trek V. Oh, yes, it is time.
Ooh, The Search for God.
This is the one you've been waiting for, folks. Let all your friends know. This is going to be fun to listen to, not as much fun for us to watch. Until next time, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Yes. I mean, thank you and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, as Dr. Adams said in his toast, may we never find space so vast, planets so cold, and heart and mind so empty that we cannot fill them with love and warmth.